Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lab Talk. Today's Thursday, June 8th, and our topic for today is all about best practices for caring for your CO2 incubator. My name is Megan McDowell, and I'm super excited to introduce our presenter for today as she has a great wealth of knowledge to share with us. Mary Kay Bates is a senior global cell culture scientist with Thermo Fisher Scientific, where she provides cell culture expertise to colleagues and customers. Her knowledge is based on 20 years of experience in academic and industrial cell and molecular biology labs focusing on cancer and gene therapy, authoring several publications. Mary Kay holds a Master of Science in Microbiology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So welcome, Mary Kay. As always, please feel free to use the Q&A window if you have any questions, and we will spend some time at the end answering those. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Mary Kay to get us started.
Well, thanks, Megan. I'm excited to be back and learn and being a part of Lab Talk. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this event today. I think we're all near and dear to our cell culture incubators, and a lot of them, we just think of them, there's a box where my cells sit, but it's also the home for your cultured cells. And when your cells aren't growing properly, you really can't do anything downstream of that, like genetic analysis or protein expression analysis and so on. So it really is an important part of your work in general. And let's talk about how to keep it working its best so that your cells grow their best. So here we go. The purpose of a CO2 incubator, obviously, is to mimic the conditions in vivo where your cells originated. And each parameter provided by the incubator affects how your cells grow. And I'll talk about them each in turn because I think over the decades we've been using cell culture, we've sort of forgotten about the importance of these things. And the thing is that your cells respond to changing conditions, especially if you're working with primary cells or stem cells. They are super reactive to the conditions around them. So, what that means is that variation in your incubation conditions can result in variation in your experimental results. So, you might not see clear results in your triplicates. You might keep repeating experiments when actually, perhaps, just a little bit better care of the conditions that are affecting your cells in the incubator will help your end results be clearer. Because in the end, the design and the engineering that goes into the incubator affects how the incubator performs. So here's some examples from people that did not follow our recommendations. And you can see that there's corrosion in the incubator, discoloration, and degradation of the stainless steel and copper. So if you follow my tips today, I think you'll have a happier incubator and hopefully your experiments will be happier as well. So first, let's talk about temperature. Obviously, temperature is maybe the first parameter we think of when we think of a heated incubator. And the goal there is to just mimic the body temperature where the cells originated. But cells are extremely reactive to temperature. So, generally you can store them for a few days at 4 degrees, but we know that higher temperatures are very detrimental to cell growth. That mimics an immune response in your body. And cells, even at 2 degrees, I've even talked with people who swear that 1 degree above normal, their fibroblasts are just pooping out, they're dying, they're sick, they're not healthy. So temperature is really important. So what can you do to help maintain the temperature in your incubator? First of all, the easiest thing to do is to think about how long you have that incubator door open. Think about every time that incubator is open, your cells are screaming, it's cold, I'm losing my temperature. So try to think about, don't open the incubator as much and try to keep the door closed as much as possible. Limit how long you have the door open. Of course, preheat your growth media. That's going to help maintain the temperature in the incubator as well as keep from shocking your cells. You can also preheat the water for the humidity reservoir. That's a little bit harder to do if you're putting in 2 or 3 liters of water at a time. Some laboratories in more modern buildings are turning the lab temperature down at night, and that can affect the incubator function because, then the incubator is working harder at night and less harder in the morning. That can affect the temperature when you first come in the day. Big one, if you have a ceiling air duct blowing on the incubator, you can redirect that. A lot of times that can be a source of contamination as well, those ceiling air ducts. I think we're pretty careful about sunlight. And then if your incubator has dual temperature probes, that will help prevent overheating of the incubator in case the first probe fails. So let's talk about carbon dioxide. Why do we provide carbon dioxide for the cells? Well, I think most of us know it's there to balance the pH. But the other thing is that in the lungs, every cell in the body pumps out carbon dioxide as a waste byproduct of metabolism. So that means that there's lots of CO2 in the blood and in the lungs as you're breathing out that waste byproduct when you exhale. It turns out that the concentration of CO2 in the lungs is about 5%, which is the most common setting for the CO2 incubator. Also in the bloodstream are native bicarbonate ions, which serve as a native buffer. So, and actually that concentration is equal to about 2 mg per mil sodium bicarbonate, which is the most common buffer used in cell growth media. It's the basis used in Eagle's minimal essential medium, or EMEM, which is the basis, as I said, for most of our cell growth media today. Be careful though, you have to check your growth media because different growth media have different concentrations of buffer. And so that requires different concentrations of CO2 in the incubator. So, how do you maintain the gas concentration in your current incubator? Number one, check your CO2 calibration monthly. You can use a handheld IR sensor like the one shown in the picture here. Check it first thing in the morning when the door's been closed all night and the incubator is absolutely at its set conditions. Use an automatic tank switcher so that when your CO2 tank runs out, it just automatically switches to the second tank. Again, like temperature, think about how often the door is open. Try to keep the incubator door as close as much as possible. Change to fresh growth media, especially if you have slow growing cells like neurons or immune cells where you don't have to split them as often. You can still feed them with fresh media because not only do the nutrients get exhausted, but also the buffer in the growth medium gets exhausted. So I was talking about checking your growth media and ensuring that you're using the correct CO2 setting on the incubator. Recently, I was talking with somebody. He's using DMEM, but that DMEM, instead of being 2 megs per mil for sodium bicarbonate, is actually 3.7. And so his CO2 setting should actually be between 8 and 10%. And when he switched, his cells grew much faster, like a 10-hour shorter doubling time. So that's something to check as well. The last thing that I'm going to talk about that that the incubator provides is high humidity. And the high humidity is there to reduce evaporation. What happens during evaporation from the growth media is that only the water evaporates. So that means that the remaining salts, minerals, hormones, growth factors in the precisely balanced growth media actually becomes concentrated to the point where toxic conditions in that well where your cells are growing can result. So low humidity equals high evaporation, can equal toxic conditions for your cells. So proper humidity, high humidity is critical to grow your healthy cells, especially in small volume dishes or small volume wells. So what can you do to maintain high humidity? Keep your water reservoir full, keep topping it off. Make sure you use only sterile distilled water, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Again, think about how often and how long the incubator door is open, because humidity is actually the most difficult parameter to recover when the door is closed after door opening. Make sure the fan is properly operating, and you can, if you need to, if you're struggling with humidity, preheat the water. That will actually speed your humidity as well. Think about uniformity throughout the chamber. It's important that all cells, especially if you're doing a big experiment, that all areas of the incubator are uniform conditions. Otherwise, you'll see varied responses from top to bottom, side to side on a shelf, depending on where your cells are incubated in the chamber. So what happens is we know that heat rises, higher air rises to the top, cold air settles to the bottom, but also CO2 gas is heavier than air, so it sinks. If you're culturing under hypoxia, nitrogen gas is lighter than air, so it rises. So active air circulation is the only way to keep conditions uniform throughout the incubator chamber. So make sure you have a circulating fan in your incubator chamber and that it's properly operating. You may hear some myths about a circulating fan, but I can tell you it is all and only good. It speeds the recovery to the set conditions after a door opening. It ensures uniformity top to bottom in your incubator. It does not dry out your cells if it's properly designed and engineered. It also offers you the opportunity to have HEPA filtration to help limit contamination in your incubator, and it results in reduced condensation so that even in high humidity, you don't see as much condensation on the shelves or on the door where you might see an opportunity for fungal growth. What if you get contamination in that incubator? Don't panic. So, first thing to do is take out your cultures, put them in a different incubator, take the incubator apart, clean and disinfect it, and then put it back together. If you have a sterilization cycle, you can run sterilization. And then the most important thing to do is to carefully observe your cultures for the next few weeks. Make sure that there's no sign of contamination. Take an extra minute or two when you're looking at them under the scope to check for confluence. If they're attached cells, do the membranes look nice and tight all the way around? Do you see any bumps or bits and bobs in the cytoplasm that might be an early indication of a stress response? And then write that down. Keep good notes of all those things, because it will help you detect a contamination or some toxicity before it gets to be a problem and that spreads to your other cultures. Very common question we get is, what's the best procedure for cleaning and disinfecting the incubator? First, wear gloves. You can switch off the incubator and the gas. If you leave them on, all you're doing is pouring heat out into the incubator, into the laboratory. Use mild dish soap in distilled water. And then just when you're finished with the soap, wipe with a clear water to remove the disinfectant, the soap and detergent, and then follow with a disinfectant wipe. We recommend only 10% or less quaternary ammonium disinfectant. Those are a couple examples there. You can use 3% hydrogen peroxide, but remember that those chemical disinfectants are tough on materials as well as tough on microorganisms. So as soon as you use a disinfectant, follow with 70% ethanol to remove any residues that could cause corrosion over time on your stainless steel or copper. And then allow it to air dry, and remember to clean the exterior, the touch surfaces or the top of the incubator where dust and dirt could collect that get blown into the incubator when you open the door. Then switch it back on and return the parts and your cultures. If you have a spill in growth media, clean it up immediately, because that's going to provide some nutrients for microorganisms, which you don't want. I mentioned distilled water. It's really important to use only sterilized distilled water in your incubator. I think a lot of us think water is water, but it's actually not true. There's lots of variation in water quality, and poor water quality can actually cause corrosion in your incubator. Tap water with chlorine causes corrosion. So never, never, never use any chlorine bleach or chlorine derivatives in your incubator. Tap water can also contain lots of bacteria and minerals. Deionized water, very commonly used in labs today for molecular biology applications. Deionized water is actually very aggressive because water seeks an equilibrium, and if it's deionized, it will actively pull ions from the stainless steel, the copper, the glass, the plastic in your incubator and cause corrosion. Water absorbs CO₂ gas just like does the media in your growth media, and it forms a weak carbonic acid. So all those aggressive waters, there's an additive effect with the CO₂ gas. RO water used less often today, but the quality there can vary tremendously, top to bottom, can vary tremendously because it's a percentage purification. So the quality of the RO water depends on the quality of the water that you started with. So for all these reasons, use only sterilized distilled water in your incubator. Okay, here's a cheat sheet for how to maintain your incubator on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. So it's a good idea to check the CO₂ gas supply on a daily basis. Make sure everything looks good on the tubing to the incubator. Check your water levels. Make sure there's enough water. Once a week, empty and refill. Don't just top off that water reservoir with sterilized distilled water. At least twice a month, clean and disinfect the incubator. At a very minimum, just spray it with 70% ethanol and wipe that down. Quarterly, check the CO₂ gas calibration. Make sure that the incubator is actually giving you your correct CO₂ setting. Once a quarter, we also recommend, if you have an onboard high temperature sterilization cycle, operate that cycle. Once a year, check around the door gasket. Make sure that's all fitting nice and tight so nothing is leaking out into the lab or that lab air is leaking into the incubator. Once a year, if you're lucky enough to have a HEPA filtration system in your incubator, replace the HEPA filter. Also replace the gas inlet air filters where the gas connects to the incubator, the access port plug, if you have one of those, any air filters. It depends on the CO₂ incubator model. You might also call your favorite tech support representative and have them schedule an inspection and a maintenance for you. Wow. Okay. So that went fast. We're at the conclusions already. Keep in mind that all of the parameters provided by the incubator affect how your cells grow. So how the incubator performs is going to affect how your cells grow. So think about, number one, think about keeping the incubator door closed as much as possible. Make sure your circulating fan inside the incubator is properly operating. That's really critical to your cell growth, to make sure that the incubator conditions are uniform and that it's recovering fast from those door openings. Use only approved disinfectants that we recommend. Otherwise, all kinds of disinfectants and disinfectant water additives can cause corrosion in the incubator. And then you'll be calling us and say, why is my incubator degrading? It's because you're using the wrong chemical in the incubator. Clean and disinfect the incubator twice a month. Keep the water pan full. Don't just top it off, but once a week, replace it with fresh, sterile distilled water. That's the best way to keep fungus from growing in your incubator water. Use only sterile distilled water and change all of your filters annually. And the reason to do all these things, I know it takes a little bit of time, is because your experimental results depend on how your cells grow in that incubator. We do have a lot of resources at our website at thermofisher.com/CO2, some of which I've written, so you can read my words word for word. And I hope you find these resources helpful. And Megan, I think we're ready for some questions.
All right. Mary Kay, that was fantastic. So much great information to help out our viewers today. So we did have quite a couple questions here in the chat. One I can answer real quickly. I saw Angela did put in the chat. Will I be able to send this session to coworkers? Absolutely. You will be able to access it on our Learn Event Hub afterwards. And we do have past sessions out on YouTube as well. So a couple different ways that you can share with your coworkers to help them, learn about these tips as well. We also had a question about what is the reason for replacing the access port versus cleaning it?
Yeah, it's just, silicone, which can degrade over time, just like your door gaskets. So you may not have to replace it annually, but just check it and make sure that it hasn't started to get hard and less flexible, because that could lead to gaps around the access port where you could have air mixing from the outside or the inside of the incubator.
Great. We also had a comment. We were told that copper sulfate was good to add to the water reservoir to reduce bacterial and fungal growth. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that goes back to when I was in the lab. So it's not the newest and greatest advice. The thing about copper sulfate is, yes, it has copper, which is naturally antimicrobial, but it can dissociate in the water, and then you get copper chloride and hydrogen sulfate or sulfuric acid. So over time, that copper sulfate can actually form acid and cause corrosion in your incubator. So that's why we don't recommend that.
Also, on that same line of corrosion, we had a question. What can we do if the incubator suffers from internal corrosion? Can this be solved?
So it depends on the level of the corrosion. If you're just starting to see little dots of rust, you can use a good cleaner to remove that rust and then do better from then on by using the correct water and the correct chemical disinfectant. So we do have some advice on that. I think there's some in that application note that I had up about proper care, which you can find here on our website at thermofisher.com/CO2. And actually, I'm going to tell you to reach out to your local Thermo scientific representative for more information. They can contact me, or I think Angela's put up my email or will at the end. So you can also reach out to me and I'll give you more information.
Great. Lots of resources there for the team. What about the water quality could cause a heavy green buildup in the water reservoir of a copper-lined incubator? For reference, we are using distilled water, no additive.
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so copper, the copper that we use in thermoscientific CO2 incubators is 100% pure natural copper. And what that means is that it's a natural element. And what that means is that it's very reactive. It reacts with everything. So maybe there's some minerals in your copper, sorry, in your water that's reacting with the copper. But I should also say that the copper is naturally going to develop a patina or a tarnish, some of which is black, some of which is green. It depends on the age of the copper, the temperature of the incubator, the water, things like that. What else is circulating around in your lab air? And so that actually, that natural patina or tarnish is a good thing because as the copper oxidizes, it speeds the efficacy of the copper in eliminating microorganisms. So depending on how green it is, that's actually probably a good thing and you're probably okay. That's what we want to see.
Great, thank you. Another person said, I find it very difficult to remove old water from our incubator with the pump it came with. Do you have any recommendations for a pump to remove old water from the bottom of the incubators?
Yeah, you know what? I just got this question just the other day. And those are great incubators, by the way. The newer models do have a drain incorporated, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about upgrading. But what I recommend is your incubators in your tissue culture room near your BSC, where you're probably using a vacuum pump to aspirate growth media from your cultures. So my recommendation is get a nice long tubing connected to your vacuum pump, which is already pretty near your incubator, and use that tubing to suck out the water from the incubator. Quick and easy.
All right. Um, Someone else was wondering, how do you monitor CO2 incubator on the weekend? Is there a way to collect data from the display panel of the incubator and send that to a cell phone?
What? You're not going into the lab on the weekend? You slacker.
Crazy.
Um, okay. Yeah, no, right now there is external monitoring. You can connect it to your building system. We also offer an OPC UA gateway, but that is not yet ready for every CO2 incubator we offer, and that might be a little bit more than you're thinking of. There are different ways to monitor it, and that's a bigger conversation. Maybe that's our next talk, huh, Megan and Angela? Um, but yeah, I think the easiest is to have your facilities person connect that into your building monitoring system.
Right.
Oh, I forgot one other thing. We do offer a SmartView Pro wireless monitoring system, and that's really cool. It's pretty inexpensive, and it's a little monitor that you put in your incubator. It communicates wirelessly and will call you. And I'm not actually sure if that will show up on your cell phone or not, but it will call you if the CO2 goes out. And I apologize to my friends who represent the SmartView that I didn't think of that right away.
Well, they can come next week and learn about the Smart View because that is actually our topic for next week's lab talk. We're going to
How
talk about how
perfect
to,
is that?
yeah. So whoever asked that question, you want to make sure you come next week because we're going to show how to install your own remote monitoring system. So great question and kind of like a little preview to next week.
One more thing on my side, real quick, Megan. I should have mentioned on the question on the copper. We actually do have a smart note on the best way to clean and maintain your copper, and you can find it on our website right here at thermofisher.com/CO2. If you click on the resources tab, it's the first smart note on under smart notes. If you scroll down,
Great. We have a couple more questions here, Mary Kay, if you have the time.
let's go.
Um, yeah, lots of great chatter today. What is the final concentration of quaternary ammonium that should be in the incubator reservoir water to help with mold growth?
Okay, there is information on that in our proper care application note. I will say that depending on the incubator, we don't always recommend that. So our newer incubators, the Hair Cell Bios and the Forma Stericycle I series incubators are actually designed so that you don't need to use any chemicals in the water. And then also I will say, so a lot of caveats here. I will also say that over time, some people have said, depending on the sensitivity of your cells, using chemicals in the water can affect your cell growth to some extent. And those would be super sensitive cells like immune cells or neurons or stem cells or primary cells. So, all in all, the best thing to do is to change out to fresh, sterile distilled water once every week or two. That will keep the mold and bacteria down out in your water so that you don't have to deal with that. If you absolutely insist on using quaternary ammonium in your water, use a 2% total quaternary ammonium diluted in the distilled water. So if you have a 10% stock solution, that's a 1 to 98 dilution of the 10% stock solution.
Great, thank you. Someone else said, speaking of the new incubators, how can we clean the drain line? During a cleaning, I recently noticed that it was green slimy in the drain parts.
Okay, so is it really green slimy or is it just green? And the reason I ask that is because that drain is actually 100% pure natural copper, which will kill off microorganisms in the drain. So you shouldn't. So if it is green, that's actually, again, the normal patina or tarnish developed by the copper and makes it even more effective and faster. So we like that. That's good. If you are seeing slime in there, what you can do is pour a disinfectant down. But again, the copper is going to react with everything. So I wouldn't leave it on there for very long and follow with copious amounts of 70% ethanol to flush out any of that disinfectant. But again, make sure if you can rub it off, then it's a concern. Maybe shoot me an email or talk to your thermoscientific representative. If you can't rub it off, then that's the normal green tarnish of the copper, which is a good thing. We love green. Green is good.
Good. Someone else said, we only use 70% ethanol to clean our incubators. Is this enough?
70% ethanol is super effective against mycoplasma, which is the number one worry for cell culture contamination. And I guess my answer is if you're not seeing any fungal growth in your incubator, you're doing an awesome job. I love you. And 70% ethanol is exactly what you need to do. Unless you're having a problem, you're doing everything right. Good job.
Good. And looks like our last question, someone said our lab has the instrument inside the incubator with the cable that hooks to computer outside. It creates condensation of water at the door. How do we solve this problem?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go out on a limb and guess that that's an in-chamber imaging system. And what happens with those guys, and yeah, really great technology, but what happens is that moving camera puts out a little heat, and that affects the incubator heat functions and the humidity functions. And as a result, you get a little condensation. It's not ideal. That's designed by an independent third party. So we don't really have an effect on how that instrument operates on our incubator. So what those incubator service, I'm sorry, in-chamber imager service people do is they turn down the temperature in your incubator by about a half degree. And that usually solves the problem. Um, so you still want to have that humidity because you're probably also culturing other cells in there and you don't want the cells in the imager to dry out. I guess my recommendation is just take a cloth and wipe that incubator, that condensation away from the glass door every day or two, and then again wipe with 70% ethanol so that you're not just adding condensation or adding microorganisms to the glass door. So that was a lot of babbling, but I would just say I think the only option at this point is to remove that condensation manually. I don't think it'll just go away. So hopefully if you remove it, it won't come back. And if it does come back, it's only a couple of times a week and then you can just do it again.
Great. Thank you for that recommendation. So I spoke too soon. We had two more questions come in. What is your recommendation to do with the HEPA filter during the quarterly steri cycle if only replaced annually?
Yeah. I mean, some people want to replace it with a new HEPA filter every time. My personal feeling is you don't need to do that. So I would just put it in a plastic bag. You've got biohazard bags sitting in your lab. It's not really a biohazard because the microorganisms can't escape the HEPA filter, and just put it back in. So just put it in a plastic bag or a sterile surgical wipe, something like that, and then stick it back in the incubator. Keep using it happily.
Great. Thank you. And lastly, what is your recommendation for dealing with recurring mold contaminations?
So the incubator doesn't care what it grows. It's just happy to do its job. And what happens with recurring mold contamination is the mold comes in whenever you open the incubator door. So it's coming in from outside the incubator. And usually what happens is you sterilize the incubator or you do a great job cleaning and disinfecting. And then a couple of weeks, you see that fungal mold come back. So it's a challenge. And the thing to do is to look around you and see what might be the source of that fungus outside the incubator. Most commonly, especially this time of year, it's the air conditioning system in your building is turned on and it's blowing moist, cold air around, and fungus are in those air ducts, especially in the ceiling. So look up in your cell culture room and see if there might be a ceiling air duct blowing on the incubator, and that's blowing fungus right in your incubator. Usually you could call the facility manager and they can redirect that airflow by just using a simple magnetic airflow hood. You can be as simple as duct taping a piece of cardboard up there just to redirect the airflow so it's not blowing on the incubator. The other thing is you could put some contamination control mats. These are sticky mats. Put them on the floor just inside and outside the tissue culture room door. And that's because we're all wearing our street shoes outside and it's nice and warm, and we're bringing dust and dirt and fungus into the lab with us. So those sticky mats will help capture that before it spreads around the room.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary Kay, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. We had a great chat today. If you think of any more questions, like Mary Kay said, reach out to your local Thermo rep, or reach out to Mary Kay in the resources that we provided. Wanted to thank you again, Mary Kay, for sharing all that fantastic information with us today. It was a great presentation. We hope everyone takes these tips back to the lab, and hopefully they'll help you best care for your CO2 incubator. Like I mentioned, be sure to join us next Thursday on the 15th, where we will be talking about installing your own remote monitoring system. So, another good chat coming up next week. So, we hope to see you then, and hope everyone has a wonderful day and rest of your week.